On the 6th of June 1944, Allied forces landed in France in what would become known as the D-Day landings or Operation Overlord, which ultimately led to the liberation of Western Europe from Nazi control and the eventual defeat of Adolf Hitler and the end of World War II. It was one of the largest military operations in history, with over 150,000 troops landing on the beaches of Normandy in just one day, making it one of the largest amphibious assaults in history. The operation involved troops from not only Britain and America, but also Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India, Belgium, Czechoslovakia, Norway, Poland, Greece, and Yugoslavia. Prior to D-Day, the Allied powers had been fighting their way up through Italy under the command of General George Patton, and had already taken a foothold in southern France, taking the town of Cassis in April of 1943 and subsequently pushing north. Meanwhile, the British were taking a more direct route through the Mediterranean, capturing the strategic island of Sicily in August of 1943. The plan was for the Americans and British to meet up in central Italy and push north together towards Germany. However, this plan was abandoned when the Germans made it clear that they intended to defend the Italian peninsula to the very end with a massive defensive line known as the Gustav Line. This would not only have stretched from the Swiss border all the way down to the toe of Italy, but also included a series of smaller defensive lines running parallel to it at varying distances, creating a sort of accordion-style defense that would be extremely costly to break through. And so a new plan was hatched. They would bypass the Gustav Line entirely and open a second front in Western Europe. In May, American and British troops crossed into France, quickly making their way across the border and establishing a beachhead. Then on June, the Allied armies began their assault on the German defenses along the coast of Normandy, with the British and Canadian forces landing in the east around the town of Caen, while the Americans landed further west around the city of Cherbourg. Despite fierce resistance, by June, the Allies had managed to push inland, securing several small towns and creating a bridgehead across the River Seine. By July, the Allies had linked up with the troops who had entered France earlier in the month, pushing the Germans back and opening up a second front in Western Europe. The war in the West would be directly influenced by the actions of resistance groups within German-occupied France. For the past 3 years, the French resistance had been carrying out acts of sabotage against the Germans, such as blowing up bridges and supply depots, as well as assassinating Nazi officials. Perhaps the most famous of these resistance fighters were the Maquisards, irregular troops who conducted guerrilla-style attacks against the Germans. There were also a number of women's organizations that played an important role in the resistance, such as the Secret Army, which published an illegal newspaper, the Invisible Front, which called for the overthrow of the Nazi regime. With the Allied victory in Normandy, the resistance groups across France began to grow in strength, carrying out increasingly daring attacks against the Germans. By the end of 1944, there were an estimated 200,000 resistance fighters in France, armed with weapons supplied by the British and Americans. They would prove to be a thorn in the side of the Germans, conducting hit-and-run tactics, harassing their supply lines and disrupting their communications. Ultimately, it was the combination of the Normandy landings and the actions of the French resistance that allowed the Allies to push the Germans back and liberate France from Nazi control. Over the next 2 years, the Allies would push through France, Belgium, and into Germany itself, eventually forcing the Germans to surrender in May of 1945. Victory in Europe, or V-Day, would be celebrated across the continent, marking the end of one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. But before we go, a quick message. If you enjoy learning about the history of our world, then why not learn more about it on our site? We have hundreds of articles written by experts, which are not only informative, but also incredibly engaging. So if you want to learn more about the world around you, then please click the link below.